It is 9:05 p.m. on Friday, November 13th, 2015. The air in Paris is cool and crisp. Inside the massive glowing bowl of the Stade de France, 80,000 screaming fans are watching the French national soccer team play Germany. Sitting in the VIP box is François Hollande, the president of France. The energy in the stadium is electric. But out on the concrete concourse at Gate L, 42-year-old Salim Toorabally is just trying to do his job. Salim is a private security guard. He is wearing a high-visibility jacket, standing at the turnstiles, checking tickets. It's a tedious, repetitive task. Suddenly, a young man wearing a dark, heavy jacket pushes his way toward the gate. He looks nervous. He avoids eye contact. "Ticket, please," Salim says, holding his hand out, blocking the turnstile. The young man pats his pockets. I have one," he mutters, his voice tight. "I'm waiting for my cousin. He has my ticket. Let me through. I need to get inside." Salim looks at him. Something isn't right. The jacket the kid is wearing is far too heavy for a mild November evening. He's sweating. He's twitchy. "No ticket, no entry," Salim says firmly, crossing his arms. "Step back from the gate." The young man glares at Salim for a fraction of a second, his eyes dead and hollow, before turning around and disappearing back into the shadows of the concourse. Salim shakes his head, assuming he just turned away a desperate fan trying to sneak into a sold-out game. He goes back to checking the line. He doesn't know it yet, but Salim Toorabally has just saved the lives of thousands of people. He didn't just turn away a fan, he turned away a 20-year-old ISIS terrorist named Bilal Hadfi, who was currently wearing a suicide vest packed with highly unstable TATP explosives and shrapnel. 15 minutes later, at exactly 9:20 p.m., boom. The explosion is deafening. It shakes the concrete pillars of the stadium. It is so loud that the 80,000 fans inside the arena go completely silent. Down on the field, the professional soccer players actually stop running, looking around in confusion. Salim flinches, his hands covering his ears. He looks toward the perimeter fence. A massive plume of dark smoke is rising into the night sky. "What was that?" another security guard yells over his radio. "Was that a firework, a gas line?" It wasn't a gas line. Bilal Hadfi, unable to breach the stadium thanks to Salim, had just detonated his vest outside a nearby McDonald's. 10 minutes later, at exactly 9:30 p.m., a second deafening explosion rocks the opposite side of the stadium, another suicide bomber. Inside the VIP box, the Secret Service agents instantly surround the French president. "We have to move," the lead agent whispers, grabbing Hollande by the arm. "Mr. President, the stadium is under attack. We are evacuating you now." But the horror unfolding at the Stade de France is merely a distraction. It is a terrifying, explosive decoy. Because 5 miles away, in the bustling, neon-lit heart of central Paris, the real slaughter is just pulling up to the curb. A coordinated, heavily armed hit squad is about to turn a vibrant Friday night into a war zone. And the most terrifying part of this nightmare, the intelligence agencies of Europe had the mastermind's name on a watch list for years. They knew he was dangerous, but because of a fatal bureaucratic blind spot, he had slipped right through their fingers and walked straight into the City of Light. To understand how a highly synchronized, military-style assault occurs in one of the most heavily policed cities on Earth, you have to look at the invisible borders of Europe. It is the summer of 2015. The Syrian civil war is raging, and ISIS is operating at the absolute peak of its power. Thousands of young, radicalized European men have traveled to the Middle East to fight. But the intelligence agencies of France, Belgium, and Germany are terrified of what happens when those men decide to come home. In the sleek, high-tech offices of the DGSE, the French equivalent of the CIA, analysts are staring at computer screens, tracking the digital footprints of known extremists. One name keeps flashing in red on their monitors: Abdelhamid Abaoud. Abaoud is a 28-year-old Belgian national. He grew up in Molenbeek, a rough, densely populated neighborhood in Brussels. But he isn't a petty street thug anymore. He's a high-ranking ISIS commander. He's been featured in gruesome propaganda videos in Syria. The intelligence agencies know his face, they know his aliases, and he's listed on the highest priority international watch lists. If he ever tries to step foot in Europe, he's supposed to be arrested instantly. Let's picture two French intelligence analysts sitting in a darkened room in Paris, drinking stale coffee, looking at Abaoud's file. "He's in Syria," the first analyst says, tapping a pen against the desk. "We have intercepts placing him in Raqqa. As long as he stays there, he's contained." "But what about his network back in Belgium?" the second analyst asks, frowning. "Molenbeek is a black hole. Belgian intelligence is underfunded. They don't have the manpower to monitor every radicalized kid sitting in a café in Brussels. If Abaoud communicates with them, we won't see it until it's too late." Here is the fatal, bureaucratic flaw that doomed 130 people: the Schengen Agreement. The Schengen area is a treaty that allows unrestricted passport-free travel across 26 European countries. It's brilliant for economics and tourism. You can drive from Germany through Belgium and straight into France without ever stopping at a border checkpoint or showing an ID. But for a terrorist, the Schengen area is an absolute gift. It means that if you can manage to sneak past the outer perimeter of Europe, say by blending in with the massive wave of refugees landing in Greece, you have a free, unchecked pass to travel anywhere on the continent. And that is exactly what Abdelhamid Abaoud did. In the fall of 2015, the most wanted terrorist in Europe slipped out of Syria. He traveled through Turkey, joined the chaotic flow of migrants crossing into Greece, and exploited the overwhelmed border guards. He used fake passports. He moved like a ghost. He didn't just sneak into Europe, he orchestrated the movement of an entire hit squad. 10 men, armed with Kalashnikov assault rifles, thousands of rounds of ammunition, and chemical explosives, quietly slipped back into the Molenbeek neighborhood of Brussels. Because the intelligence databases of Belgium and France were notoriously fractured because they didn't share information efficiently in real time, the French DGSE had absolutely no idea that an ISIS commander was sitting just a 3-hour drive from Paris, planning an invasion. Abaoud rented safe houses. He secured 3 rental cars, a black Seat Leon, a black Renault Clio, and a Volkswagen Polo. He built suicide vests using TATP, a highly volatile homemade chemical explosive known as the Mother of Satan. It's made from nail polish remover and hair bleach. It's incredibly unstable, but it doesn't set off traditional military bomb sniffers. The hit squad split into 3 highly coordinated teams. Team 1, the Stadium Bombers. Their job was to hit the Stade de France, draw the heavy police units out of the city center, and create massive, televised panic. Team 2, the drive-by shooters, led by Abaoud himself. Their job was to cruise through the trendy, packed restaurant districts of the 10th and 11th arrondissements, maximizing civilian casualties on the streets. Team 3, the Bataclan assault team. Their job was to breach a packed concert hall, take hostages, and turn a music venue into an abattoir. On the afternoon of November 13th, the 3 rental cars quietly crossed the border from Belgium into France. There were no guards, there were no passport checks. They simply drove down the highway, heavily armed, listening to the radio. The trap was fully set. The intelligence net had failed. And as the sun went down over the Eiffel Tower, thousands of Parisians were pouring out into the streets, laughing, drinking wine, and sitting down at outdoor cafes, entirely oblivious to the ghosts that had just entered their city. Quick pause. I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. Don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow. Thank you. All right, let's continue. It is 9:25 p.m. on Friday, November 13th. 5 minutes have passed since Bilal Hadfi detonated his suicide vest outside the Stade de France. Across the city, the elite tactical units of the French police, the BRI and the Raid, are scrambling their armored vehicles, believing they are responding to a localized bombing at a soccer stadium. But 5 miles south, deep in the trendy, bustling 10th arrondissement of Paris, the true nightmare is quietly pulling up to the curb. The intersection of Rue Bichat and Rue Alibert is packed. It is an exceptionally mild November evening. Hundreds of young Parisians are sitting outside on the crowded terrace of Le Carillon, a popular corner bar, drinking cheap beer and smoking cigarettes. Directly across the narrow street is Le Petit Cambodge, a brightly lit Cambodian restaurant with large plate glass windows. The atmosphere is loud, vibrant, and incredibly dense. People are shoulder to shoulder. A sleek black Seat Leon hatchback slowly turns onto Rue Bichat. It doesn't look like a military vehicle. It looks like a typical Parisian rental car. But inside the dark cabin, the mastermind of the attacks, Abdelhamid Aboud, is sitting in the passenger seat with his Zastava M70, a Yugoslavian variant of the AK-47 assault rifle, resting on his lap. In the back seat is his childhood friend from Brussels, Brahim Abdeslam, also heavily armed. The black Seat creeps to a halt right in the middle of the intersection, idling between the two packed restaurants. For exactly 4 seconds, nobody notices the car. The music is playing. The laughter is loud. Then, the doors of the Seat violently swing open. Aboud and Abdeslam step out onto the cobblestones. They do not yell. They do not make demands. They raise their heavy, military-grade rifles, plant their feet in a wide, stable stance, and simply open fire on the crowded terraces. The sound of an unsuppressed Kalashnikov firing fully automatic bursts in a narrow, echo-heavy Parisian street is absolutely deafening. It sounds like a jackhammer striking sheet metal right next to your ear. The acoustic confusion in the first 2 seconds is complete. Fireworks? A young woman sitting at Le Carillon asks her boyfriend, spilling her wine glass as she turns toward the street. The boyfriend doesn't answer. He is instantly struck in the chest by a 7.62 millimeter steel core bullet traveling at 2,300 feet per second. The terrible reality of a military rifle is that it isn't just a gun, it is a weapon of horrific kinetic energy. The rounds do not just pierce, they shatter concrete, tear through solid oak tables, and obliterate human tissue. The sheer volume of fire is overwhelming. Aboud and Abdeslam are dumping 30-round magazines into the screaming crowds in a matter of seconds. Glass explodes outward from Le Petit Cambodge as bullets rip through the dining room. People dive under the tiny, flimsy metal café tables, a completely useless gesture against high-velocity, armor-piercing rounds. Blood instantly pools on the pavement, mixing with shattered wine glasses and upturned plates of food. "Get down! Get inside!" A waiter screams from the doorway of the Cambodian restaurant, frantically waving his arms at the terrified patrons on the terrace. But it's too late. The gunmen are sweeping their muzzles back and forth like they're spraying a hose. It is methodical, cold-blooded, and terrifyingly precise. In less than 3 minutes, they fire over 100 rounds into the two restaurants. 15 people are dead. 10 more are critically wounded, bleeding out on the cobblestones. Aboud casually ejects a spent magazine, letting it clatter to the pavement. He slaps a fresh one into the receiver, racks the bolt, and slides back into the passenger seat of the Seat Leon. The tires squeal as the driver floors the accelerator, speeding away down the narrow street before the first police siren can even be heard in the distance. This isn't a hostage situation. It is a rolling, drive-by massacre, and the police are entirely unprepared for it. Inside the central command center of the Préfecture de Police, the massive digital map of Paris on the wall is suddenly lighting up with red dots. The dispatcher's voice is tight with panic. "All units, we have reports of shots fired at Rue Albert, multiple casualties. We have a bombing at the Stade de France. Send ambulances to the 10th arrondissement immediately." A senior police captain stares at the map, his stomach dropping. The dots aren't localized, they're spread out. "This is coordinated," the captain mutters, grabbing his radio. "We are dealing with a multi-site attack. Every available unit, lock down the 10th and 11th districts. They are hitting soft targets." But the terrorists are moving faster than the police can react. They have a massive tactical advantage. They are blending in with the chaotic city traffic. Just 7 minutes later, at 9:32 p.m., the black Seat Leon turns onto Rue de la Fontaine-Roy, just a few blocks away. They pull up outside Café Bombière and a bustling pizzeria called La Casa Nostra. Again, the doors swing open. Again, the heavy rhythmic crack, crack, crack of the Kalashnikovs rips through the night air. Aboud and Abdeslam step out and fire directly into the crowded pizzeria. A man diving over his terrified wife is struck in the back. A young woman running for the kitchen is hit in the leg, collapsing onto the tile floor. It is a carbon copy of the first strike. Over 100 rounds fired in under 2 minutes. 5 more innocent people are murdered on the sidewalk. 8 others are severely wounded. The gunmen get back in the car. They vanish. The sheer psychological terror of this tactic is paralyzing the city. The Parisian police are swarming the streets, their sirens wailing, their blue lights flashing off the Haussmann-style buildings. But every time the police arrive at a blood-soaked restaurant, the killers are already gone, driving just a few blocks away to find another crowded terrace. At 9:36 p.m., they strike for the 3rd time. They pull up to La Belle Équipe, a lively bistro on Rue de Charonne. This is the deadliest of the drive-by hits. The terrace is packed with people celebrating birthdays and the start of the weekend. Aboud and Abdeslam don't even bother aiming carefully. They just dump their magazines into the dense crowd. 19 people are slaughtered in the span of 3 minutes. The pavement is literally awash with blood. The city is in absolute suffocating chaos. The hospitals are overwhelmed. The police switchboards are crashing from the sheer volume of frantic, terrified 112 calls. People are running through the streets in tears, trying to find shelter, completely unaware of where the black car will strike next. But as horrific as the drive-by shootings are, they are merely the warm-up. Because just 4 minutes later, at 9:40 p.m., a different car, a black Volkswagen Polo, quietly pulls up to the curb outside a massive historic concert hall called the Bataclan. Inside, 1,500 fans are listening to loud rock music, packed shoulder to shoulder on the general admission floor. They are completely, totally cut off from the news outside. They have no idea Paris is burning. And as the 3 heavily armed men step out of the Volkswagen and walk toward the main glass doors of the theater, the deadliest chapter of the night is about to begin. It is 9:40 p.m. The Bataclan Concert Hall is a legendary piece of Parisian architecture. Built in 1864, it sits on the Boulevard Voltaire in the 11th arrondissement. The venue is shaped like a massive, ornate horseshoe with a wide, open general admission floor on the bottom level and a wraparound balcony with red velvet seats above. Tonight, the Bataclan is completely sold out. 1,500 fans, mostly young professionals in their 20s and 30s, are packed shoulder to shoulder on the wooden floor. The heat from the bodies is intense. The air smells of spilled beer and sweat. Up on the brightly lit stage, the American rock band Eagles of Death Metal is tearing through their set list. The music is incredibly loud. The heavy bass from the amplifiers is physically vibrating the floorboards under the fans' feet. Down near the back of the room, standing by the main entrance doors, is a 35-year-old audio engineer named Arthur. He is holding a plastic cup of beer, nodding his head to the heavy, distorted guitar riffs. He is standing right next to the merch table. Outside the glass doors, the Boulevard Voltaire is relatively quiet. The heavy soundproofing of the 150-year-old venue is keeping the blistering rock music contained inside. But suddenly, Arthur notices a flash of movement out of the corner of his eye. A black Volkswagen Polo screeches to a halt right in front of the main entrance. 3 young men step out. They are dressed entirely in black. They are wearing heavy tactical vests. And they are holding Zastava M70 assault rifles. These are not the men who shot up the cafes. This is Team 3, the assault team. Led by 28-year-old Sami Amimour, a French national who had spent years fighting for ISIS in Syria, the 3 gunmen do not hesitate. They do not shout a warning. They simply raise the muzzles of their heavy rifles and pull the triggers. The plate glass doors of the Bataclan explode inward. The sound of 3 Kalashnikovs firing fully automatic bursts simultaneously is deafening even over the heavy rock music. It sounds like a string of massive firecrackers detonating inside an empty metal dumpster. Arthur's plastic cup drops from his hand. He watches, paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of the image, as the 3 men step through the shattered glass and immediately gun down the 2 unarmed security guards standing in the vestibule. The gunmen step over the bodies and walk straight into the main hall. Inside the packed auditorium, the acoustic confusion is an absolute fatal trap. When the first burst of 7.62mm rounds rips through the back of the crowd, people do not immediately dive for cover.
Human psychology desperately tries to rationalize the terrifying sound. Is that part of the show? A young woman standing near the center of the floor yells to her friend, looking around in confusion. Are those firecrackers? Pyrotechnics? Up on the stage, the lead singer of the band, Jesse Hughes, hears the sharp rhythmic popping. He stops strumming his guitar and looks toward the back of the room, squinting against the blinding stage lights. Then, the second volley begins. This time, the gunmen elevate their muzzles and sweep them horizontally across the dense, packed mass of 1,500 people. It is like firing a machine gun into a crowded subway car. It is mathematically impossible for them to miss. The bullets tear through the crowd with devastating, horrific kinetic energy. The rounds do not just pierce flesh, they shatter bone, tumbling through multiple bodies in a single shot. The realization of what is happening ripples through the massive room like a physical shockwave. The music violently stops. The drummer ducks behind his massive drum kit. The guitarists sprint off the side of the stage. The cheering instantly morphs into a deafening, primal, collective scream. It is the sound of absolute, suffocating terror.
"Get down! Get on the floor!" a man yells, grabbing his girlfriend by the shoulders and pulling her down onto the sticky wooden floorboards. But there's nowhere to hide. The Bataclan is an open bowl. There are almost no pillars on the main floor. The only cover is the bodies of the dead and the dying. Within 30 seconds, the entire center of the floor is a chaotic, writhing mass of humanity desperately trying to crawl away from the entrance. People are slipping on the rapidly pooling blood. They're scrambling over chairs, trampling each other in a blind, desperate panic to reach the emergency exits on the sides of the stage. But the gunmen are methodical. They are not rushing. They are walking slowly, calmly, side by side, executing a military-style sweep of the room. They are hunting in a cage. Amimour ejects a spent 30-round magazine, letting the heavy steel clatter to the floor. He clicks a fresh one into the receiver, racks the bolt, and points his rifle down at a young man trying to crawl toward the bar. He fires a single shot. "Allahu Akbar," one of the gunmen shouts, his voice cold and flat over the screams. "This is for Syria. This is what you have done in Syria." Arthur, the audio engineer who was standing by the merch table, is lying flat on his stomach in the dark hallway. He is covered in the blood of a stranger. He holds his breath, squeezing his eyes shut, trying to make himself as small as physically possible. The heavy, rhythmic thud, thud, thud of the gunmen's boots echoes against the floorboards as they slowly walk down the aisles, methodically executing anyone who moves. "Don't move, don't breathe," a man whispers next to Arthur, his face pressed against the cold floor. "Play dead. If you move, they will shoot you." For hundreds of people trapped on the main floor, playing dead is their only option. They lie perfectly still, covered in blood, surrounded by the horrific sounds of their friends dying, while the three men slowly reload their weapons. But for the hundreds of people trapped up on the balcony, the nightmare is taking a completely different, agonizing turn. When the shooting started, the fans on the second level couldn't see the gunmen. They just heard the deafening gunfire and the screaming from below. Panic immediately erupted in the aisles. People sprinted for the stairs, only to realize the gunmen were blocking the main exit routes. Dozens of people scramble up into the rafters. They kick open the doors of small administrative offices, dressing rooms, and supply closets. They cram themselves inside, turning off the lights, locking the doors, and pushing heavy filing cabinets against the frames. They are barricaded inside tiny, airless rooms, clutching their cell phones in the pitch black. "We are trapped in a closet on the second floor," a young woman texts her mother, her thumbs shaking violently over the glowing screen. "There are men with guns downstairs. I love you so much. If I don't make it out, please tell my sister I love her." Down on the floor, Amimour looks up at the balcony. He sees the panicked movement. He points his Kalashnikov toward the red velvet seats and fires a massive, sweeping burst up into the ceiling. "Go upstairs," Amimour orders the two other gunmen, his voice echoing in the sudden silence of the room. "Clear the balcony. Take hostages." The two men nod. They reload their weapons and slowly begin walking up the curving carpeted staircases.
The initial chaotic slaughter of the breach is over, but the siege of the Bataclan has just begun. For the next 2.5 hours, the hundreds of people trapped inside will endure an agonizing, suffocating psychological torture, waiting in the dark while the French elite police units prepare to breach the bloodiest hostage crisis in modern European history.
To understand the absolute, agonizing psychological torture of the Bataclan, you have to understand what happens when the shooting stops. It does not get peaceful. It gets worse. By 9:50 p.m., the initial frenzied massacre on the main floor has ended. The three terrorists have emptied multiple 30-round magazines into the crowd. The air inside the 150-year-old theater is a thick, suffocating fog of gray cordite smoke. But the most terrifying sensory detail of the room is not the smell of the gunpowder or the metallic copper scent of the blood pooling on the sloped wooden floorboards. It is the sound. Hundreds of cell phones are ringing simultaneously. As the news of the rolling terror attacks breaks across the Parisian television networks, panicked parents, husbands, and wives are desperately calling the people they know are inside the concert hall. The floor of the Bataclan is lit up by hundreds of glowing, vibrating rectangular screens, playing cheerful ringtones and pop songs in the middle of an abattoir. 28-year-old Julian is lying flat on his stomach near the center of the main floor. He's buried under the weight of two strangers. He cannot feel his left leg. He's covered in blood, but he doesn't know if it belongs to him or the man lying lifeless across his back. Julian's own phone begins to vibrate violently in his front jeans pocket. His heart stops. He knows it is his fiancée calling. Up on the stage, Sami Amimour, the 28-year-old French ISIS fighter, paces back and forth. He's listening to the ringing phones. He raises his Zastava M70 assault rifle and points it down at a glowing screen illuminating the face of a young woman lying in the center aisle. He pulls the trigger. A single, deafening shot echoes through the hall. The screen shatters. The woman stops moving. "If a phone rings, you die," Amimour announces, his voice echoing off the high, ornate ceilings. "If you cry, you die. If you move, you die." Julian squeezes his eyes shut, biting down so hard on his own lip that he tastes copper. He focuses every ounce of his willpower on not reaching into his pocket to silence the vibrating phone. He forces his breathing to become incredibly shallow. For the hundreds of people trapped on the main floor, this is their reality for the next 2 hours. They're playing a horrific game of statues with men who are actively hunting for the slightest twitch of a muscle. If a wounded person groans in pain, a gunman casually walks over and executes them with a single shot to the head. But outside the building, the first fragmented, chaotic response of the French authorities is arriving. It is exactly 10 p.m. A local police commissaire, a district police chief, and his driver pull up to the Bataclan in a standard patrol car. They are not the BRI. They are not the elite, heavily armored anti-terror tactical units. They are beat cops. They step out of their vehicle. They are wearing soft Kevlar vests designed to stop a pistol round, not a high-velocity steel-core rifle bullet. They are armed only with standard-issue Sig Sauer 9mm handguns. But they hear the executions happening inside. They know they cannot wait for the heavy cavalry. The commissaire looks at his driver, nodding once. They kick through the shattered glass of the main doors and step into the vestibule. The scene defies human comprehension. The lobby is a slaughterhouse. The commissaire slowly peeks around the doorframe into the main hall. Through the thick cordite smoke, he spots Sami Amimour standing on the brightly lit stage, holding his Kalashnikov, looking down at the hostages. The commissaire raises his 9mm pistol. He takes a breath, aligns his iron sights, and pulls the trigger. The 9mm bullet travels across the massive room and strikes Amimour directly in the torso. Amimour drops his rifle and falls backwards onto the stage. But Amimour isn't just a gunman, he's a martyr. He's wearing a suicide vest packed with TAPT explosives and ball bearings. As Amimour hits the floor, his hand desperately grips the detonator cord hidden in his pocket. He squeezes it. Boom. The detonation of the suicide vest inside the enclosed, highly pressurized acoustics of the concert hall is apocalyptic. A massive fireball engulfs the stage. The concussive shockwave violently rips through the room, blowing out the remaining windows and sending a shower of human remains and jagged shrapnel raining down onto the survivors, playing dead on the floor. The commissaire and his driver are physically thrown backward by the blast wave. Realizing they are completely outgunned and outmatched by suicide bombers, they retreat to the street to hold the perimeter, waiting for the elite raid and BRI tactical units to arrive. But that single heroic pistol shot changes the entire tactical reality of the night. Up on the second-floor balcony, the two remaining terrorists, Omar Ismail Mostefi and Fouad Mohammed Agad, hear the massive explosion. They realize Amimour is dead. They realize the police are breaching. They panic. They abandon their plan to systematically execute the people in the rafters. They need human shields. Mostefi runs down a dark, carpeted hallway on the second floor, kicking open the doors to the upper seating galleries. He finds a group of about 20 terrified concertgoers cowering behind the red velvet seats. "Get up!" Mostefi screams, pointing his smoking rifle at a 30-year-old man named Sebastian. "Get up! Hands on your heads! Move into the hallway!" The 20 hostages, trembling, covered in the dust from the explosion, are herded into a narrow 50-foot-long corridor at the back of the building. It is a dead-end hallway. There is a row of windows on one side looking down onto the street, and a set of heavy wooden double doors at the far end. The gunmen force the hostages to stand directly in front of the windows and the doors. They are building a fortress of human flesh. "You!" Mohammed Agad barks, grabbing Sebastian by the collar of his shirt and shoving him against the glass window. "Look outside! Look down at the street! Tell me what the police are doing!" Sebastian presses his forehead against the cold glass. His legs are shaking so violently he can barely stand. He looks down on the Boulevard Voltaire. They are setting up a perimeter," Sebastian stammers, his voice a terrified whisper. "There are police cars blocking the street. Men with heavy shields are getting out of black vans." "Good," Mostefi laughs coldly. "Tell them to stay back. If they come through that door, we detonate our vests. We blow you all to pieces." For the hostages crammed in that suffocating, narrow hallway, the psychological torture is absolute. They are standing inches away from two heavily armed fanatics wearing bombs. The gunmen force the hostages to act as negotiators, making them shout out the windows to the heavily armed police officers assembling in the street below. "They say you have to pull back," a hostage screams out the shattered window, tears streaming down his face. "They have bombs! Please stay back!" But the terror isn't confined to that hallway. All across the massive Bataclan complex, dozens of people are hiding in completely invisible pockets of the building. In a tiny 2-by-3-meter suspended ceiling space above the bathrooms, 14 people are crammed together, lying flat on the flimsy plasterboard. It is over 100 degrees inside the ceiling. The air is completely stale. If one person shifts their weight too heavily, the plasterboard will snap, dropping them all directly into the path of the gunmen below. A young woman named Claire is holding her hand tightly over the mouth of a stranger who is hyperventilating. She types a frantic message on her phone, her screen dimmed to the lowest possible brightness. "Mom, I'm in the ceiling. The terrorists are right outside the bathroom door. They're talking to the police. I think I'm gonna die here. I'm so sorry." It is now 11:30 p.m. Nearly 2 hours have passed since the first shot was fired. Down on the street, the heavy cavalry has finally arrived. The BRI, the French Research and Intervention Brigade, are the most elite, highly trained hostage rescue unit in the country. They are wearing heavy 80-pound Kevlar bomb suits. They are carrying massive rolling ballistic shields designed to stop armor-piercing rifle rounds. The commander of the BRI stands behind a black armored truck, looking at the blueprints of the Bataclan spread out on the hood. He knows they are dealing with a nightmare scenario. This isn't a bank robbery. The terrorists do not want money. They do not want a getaway car. They want to kill as many innocent people as mathematically possible before detonating themselves. They are dug into a dead-end hallway on the second floor, the commander tells his assault team, pointing to the blueprint. They have 20 hostages positioned as human shields. They are wearing TAP explosive belts. The men of the BRI lock their visors down. They rack the bolts of their Heckler & Koch assault rifles. "We do not negotiate with martyrs," the commander says, his voice cold steel. "We breach, we shield the hostages, we take the shooters down before they can press the detonators." At 12:20 a.m., the heavily armored column of the BRI forms up outside the shattered glass doors of the Bataclan. The agonizing 150-minute wait is over. The final explosive, devastating climax of the Paris attacks is about to begin. It is exactly 12:20 a.m. on Saturday, November 14th. The heavy, reinforced boots of the French Research and Intervention Brigade, the BRI, crunch over the shattered plate glass of the Bataclan's main entrance. These are the most elite, highly trained counterterrorism operators in France. They are men who have spent their entire careers preparing for the absolute worst-case scenarios. But as the lead element of the assault column steps into the main auditorium, the sheer scale of the atrocities stops them cold. The air is incredibly hot, thick with the metallic, coppery smell of massive blood loss, mixed with the acrid chemical burn of spent gunpowder and detonated TATP. The massive, open wooden floor of the concert hall is completely covered with the bodies of the dead and the severely wounded. It is impossible to walk a straight line. "Watch your step," the column leader whispers into his throat mic, his voice tight. "Do not step on the victims. Keep your sectors of fire clear. Eyes up." The operators move in a tight, fluid, heavily armored formation. They are carrying Heckler & Koch G36 compact assault rifles. At the very front of the column is the point man. He is not carrying a rifle. His job is entirely defensive, and he is carrying one of the most vital pieces of tactical equipment in the world, a massive 180-pound Kevlar and ceramic ballistic shield mounted on small, heavy-duty steel casters. This shield is designed to absorb the kinetic energy of military-grade, armor-piercing rounds. It is their mobile fortress. The column slowly, agonizingly makes its way across the blood-soaked floor and begins to climb the curving, carpeted staircase toward the second-level balcony. Upstairs, at the end of a 50-foot-long, narrow, dead-end hallway, the final two terrorists, Omar Ismail Mostafai and Fouad Mohammed Agad, are waiting. They have constructed a barricade of human flesh. 20 terrified, exhausted hostages are lined up in front of a set of heavy wooden double doors. Mostafai and Mohammed Agad are standing right behind them, the muzzles of their Kalashnikovs resting on the shoulders of the weeping civilians. Their fingers are hovering over the detonator triggers of their suicide vests. "Tell them we will blow it," Mostafai whispers into the ear of Sebastian, the hostage pressed against the window. "Tell them if they open that door, you all die in pieces." Outside the heavy wooden doors, the BRI column silently stacks up. The tactical reality of this hallway is an absolute nightmare. In a standard hostage rescue, police use the element of surprise to breach a room and neutralize the targets before they can react. But here, there is no surprise. The terrorists are staring directly at the door. Furthermore, the hallway is incredibly narrow, barely wide enough for two men to stand shoulder to shoulder. If the BRI enters, they are walking into a fatal funnel, a choke point where a single Kalashnikov on full automatic can wipe out the entire assault team. The BRI commander, standing one floor below, makes a final, desperate attempt to resolve the siege without detonating the vests. A designated negotiator calls a cell phone that belongs to one of the hostages, which the terrorists have confiscated. The negotiation lasts exactly 3 minutes. "We are the soldiers of the Caliphate," Mohammed Agad screams into the phone, his voice echoing down the narrow corridor. "We want the French military out of Syria. If you breach this door, we detonate. We want to die." The phone goes dead. The commander looks at his assault team leader. He nods. There is no negotiation. There is only violence of action. "Top action," the commander whispers over the encrypted radio net. "Breach the doors." At 12:18 a.m., the point man kicks the heavy wooden double doors. They explode open. The massive 180-pound ballistic shield is violently shoved into the fatal funnel of the hallway. The BRI operators instantly follow, stacking up tightly behind the Kevlar wall, their rifles tracking over the top and around the sides. "Get down!" the operators roar at the top of their lungs. "Hostages, get on the floor, now!" Sebastian and the other 19 hostages do not hesitate. Driven by pure instinctual terror, they dive flat under the carpeted floor, pressing their faces into the floorboards, covering their heads. The terrorists instantly open fire. The narrow hallway erupts into a blinding, deafening tunnel of muzzle flashes. The sound of 2 Kalashnikovs firing fully automatic bursts indoors is physically painful. It registers at over 160 decibels. Mustafa and Mohammed Agad are dumping 30-round magazines directly into the approaching ballistic shield. For the point man pushing the shield, the physical experience is terrifying. Every time a 7.62mm steel core round strikes the ceramic face of the shield, it transfers over 1,500 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. The shield violently shudders and sparks. The impact sounds like a man trapped inside a steel drum while someone beats the outside with a sledgehammer. Ping, 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 ping. Nearly 30 armor-piercing rounds smash into the shield, cratering the Kevlar, but the ceramic core holds. The armor does its job. The BRI operators, crouching behind the mobile fortress, return fire. They are shooting down a narrow corridor, deliberately aiming high to avoid the hostages lying flat on the floor between them and the terrorists. Flash bangs out, an operator screams over the deafening roar of the gunfire. He pulls the pins on 2 stun grenades and hurls them over the top of the shield, bouncing them down the hallway directly toward the terrorists. The stun grenades detonate with a blinding magnesium-white flash and a concussive boom that temporarily paralyzes the human nervous system. The terrorists flinch, their firing momentarily interrupted. That microsecond of hesitation is all the BRI needs. The shield pushes forward, the operators step out from behind the armor, their laser sights cutting through the thick, gray cordite smoke. An operator acquires Muhammad Agad in his sights and fires a 3-round burst. The bullets strike the terrorist in the chest, but Muhammad Agad's hand is already closed tightly around the detonator switch in his pocket. As his body drops backward, his thumb compresses the trigger. The TATP suicide vest detonates. The explosion inside the confined space of the narrow hallway is catastrophic. A massive fireball violently expands, consuming the back of the corridor. The sheer concussive force of the blast blows out every single window overlooking the street. The shockwave physically throws the BRI operators backward, slamming them against the walls and showering the hallway in plaster, shrapnel, and human remains. Through the suffocating dust and the ringing in their ears, the operators realize the second terrorist, Mustafa, is still alive. He is severely wounded by the blast of his own partner's vest, but he is desperately trying to reach for his own detonator. Before his fingers can close around the switch, the BRI operators unleash a synchronized volley of fire. Dozens of 5.56mm rounds strike Mustafa simultaneously. His body is thrown backward into a corner. His suicide vest does not detonate. The gunfire stops. The blinding flashes cease. For 10 agonizing seconds, the only sound in the hallway is the hiss of broken water pipes, the settling of pulverized drywall, and the heavy, ragged breathing of the men in armor. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" the assault leader yells, his voice muffled by the ringing in his ears. "Clear the room. Check the vests." The operators slowly advance through the thick, toxic smoke. They keep their rifles trained on the mangled remains of the terrorists, ensuring the threat is permanently neutralized. An explosives expert carefully approaches Mustafa's body, examining the intact suicide belt, confirming the wiring has been severed by the gunfire. "Threat neutralized," the operator radios down to command. "The hallway is secure." Then the operators look down on the floor. Lying in a tight, terrified cluster, covered in plaster dust, shattered glass, and the blood of the suicide bomber, are the 20 hostages. Sebastian slowly lifts his head, his ears bleeding from the massive overpressure of the detonation. "Are you hit?" a heavily armored BRI operator asked, dropping to one knee, frantically checking the hostages for bullet wounds. "Did anyone take a round?" In a mathematical, tactical miracle that defies all logic and probability, not a single hostage in that narrow 50-foot hallway was struck by the crossfire. Not a single hostage was killed by the massive TATP detonation that happened just 15 feet from them. "We are alive," Sebastian whispers, grabbing the heavy Kevlar sleeve, tears cutting through the thick layer of gray dust on his face. "We are alive." The siege of the Bataclan is finally over. The nightmare of the barricade has been broken. But as the adrenaline begins to fade and the tactical teams start the grueling, heartbreaking process of evacuating the survivors from the ceiling tiles, the closets, and the blood-soaked main floor, the true agonizing toll of the night begins to set in. The gunfire has stopped, but the city of Paris and the intelligence agencies of the entire Western world are about to wake up to a reality completely, fundamentally altered by the ghosts who slipped through the cracks. When the sun finally rises over Paris on the morning of Saturday, November 14th, it illuminates a city that has been fundamentally, irreversibly fractured. The City of Light is completely locked down. The metro is suspended. The schools are closed. The usually bustling, romantic avenues are eerily empty save for the wailing of ambulances and the heavy armored personnel carriers of the French military rolling through the intersections. The official body count begins to broadcast across the global news networks, and the numbers are paralyzing. 130 innocent people have been murdered. 416 are severely wounded, many suffering from catastrophic, life-altering injuries caused by high-velocity rifle rounds and shrapnel. 90 of those fatalities occurred on the wooden floorboards of the Bataclan alone. As the forensic teams in white hazmat suits begin the agonizing, meticulous process of processing the crime scenes, the intelligence agencies of France and Belgium are operating in a state of absolute, frantic panic. They know that 9 of the terrorists are dead. 7 detonated their TATP suicide vests, and 2 were killed by the police. But they also know that a hit squad operates with logistical support. And as they pull the security camera footage from the Stade de France and the streets of the 10th arrondissement, a terrifying realization washes over the command center of the DGSE. There is a 10th man. His name is Salah Abdeslam. He's a 26-year-old French national living in Belgium, and he's the brother of Brahim Abdeslam, one of the drive-by shooters who blew himself up at a café earlier in the night. Salah's job was critical. He drove the black Renault Clio that dropped off the 3 stadium bombers. Intelligence intercepts indicate he was then supposed to drive to the 18th arrondissement, walk into a crowded area, and detonate his own suicide vest. But Salah didn't press the button. Whether it was a mechanical malfunction with the volatile TATP wiring or a sudden, overwhelming surge of human cowardice, Salah took off his heavy explosive vest. He abandoned his rental car in the northern district of Paris, dumped the bomb in a municipal trash can in the suburb of Montrouge, and bought a burner phone. He called 2 friends back in the Molenbeek neighborhood of Brussels. "I need a ride," Salah told them, standing in the shadows of a Parisian alleyway while police sirens screamed past him. "Come get me now." And here's where the ultimate, infuriating failure of the European border system delivers its final insult to the victims of Friday night. At 9 a.m. on Saturday morning, while the blood is literally still being washed off the Parisian sidewalks, Salah Abdeslam is sitting in the back seat of a Volkswagen Golf, speeding north on the A2 highway toward the Belgian border. Just a few miles from the crossing, they hit a police roadblock. The French gendarmerie have set up checkpoints on all major outbound highways, desperately searching for accomplices. A heavily armed police officer approaches the driver's side window. "Passports and ID," the officer demands, his hand resting on the grip of his pistol. Salah, his heart hammering against his ribs, hands over his real, authentic ID card. The officer takes the IDs back to his cruiser. He types the name Salah Abdeslam into the police database. He waits. The computer hums. The screen comes back green. No active warrants, no red flags. Because the French intelligence agencies and the Belgian counter-terrorism units operate on heavily siloed, fragmented databases, the system has not yet synced the rental car records or the newly discovered suspect list with the highway patrol's computers. The digital dots have not been connected. The officer walks back to the car and hands Salah his ID through the window. "Drive safe," the officer says, waving them through. The most wanted man in Europe rolls up his window, crosses the invisible, frictionless border of the Schengen area, and simply vanishes into the dense concrete maze of Brussels. It will take an unprecedented, massive international manhunt, spanning 4 grueling months and involving thousands of heavily armed raids, before police finally corner and capture him just a few blocks from where he grew up. But the damage to the psyche of Europe is already permanent. The political fallout from the Paris attacks is explosive. The French president immediately declares a national state of emergency, the first time such a decree has been issued since the Algerian War in the 1960s. The bureaucratic walls that allowed Abdelhamid Abaoud to commute to a massacre are violently torn down. The attacks force a brutal, unsparing audit of how intelligence is shared across the European Union. Europol creates a massive, centralized counter-terrorism database. The days of Belgium holding a puzzle piece and France holding a puzzle piece but refusing to put them together are over. But the most visible, haunting change is the complete militarization of daily life. The French government launches Opération Sentinelle. Within 48 hours of the attacks, 10,000 fully combat-equipped soldiers of the French army are deployed directly onto the civilian streets of the country. Today, if you walk past the Eiffel Tower or stroll through the Louvre or sit at a café in the 10th arrondissement, you will see them. Squads of soldiers in green camouflage fatigues wearing Kevlar helmets, carrying loaded FAMAS assault rifles, patrolling the cobblestones. They are a permanent, heavily armed reminder that the invisible contract of safety in a modern city has been irrevocably altered. Before November 13, 2015, the terrifying reality of a coordinated military-style siege was something that happened in distant war zones. It happened in places you watched on the evening news. But Paris proved that the war zone can be a Friday night rock concert. It can be a Cambodian restaurant. It can be a soccer stadium. The true horror of that night is the realization that the victims did absolutely nothing wrong. They didn't take a risk. They didn't walk down a dark alley. They were just young people, sitting shoulder to shoulder, laughing, drinking wine, and listening to music. They were protected by the illusion of civilization, an illusion that relied on databases syncing perfectly, borders being monitored accurately, and security guards checking every single ticket. And when that fragile system failed, the toll was paid by the ordinary people who found themselves staring down the barrel of a Kalashnikov, lying on the floor of the Bataclan, waiting for the heavy cavalry to arrive. If there is any light to be found in the absolute darkness of that November night, it is the quiet, unsung heroism of the people who held the line when the system broke. It is the police commissaire who walked into a slaughterhouse with a 9mm pistol to face down 3 suicide bombers. It is the patrons inside the cafes who threw their own bodies over their loved ones to shield them from the armor-piercing rounds. And it is Salim Toorabally, the 42-year-old security guard at Gate L of the Stade de France, a man making minimum wage who looked a nervous terrorist in the eye, crossed his arms, and simply said, "No ticket, no entry." By doing his job, by refusing to bend the rules for a stranger in a heavy jacket, Salim kept a TAP suicide vest out of a stadium holding 80,000 tightly packed people. He prevented what would have undoubtedly been a stampede of catastrophic, unimaginable proportions. The terrorists wanted to break the spirit of Paris. They wanted to prove that the city of light could be drowned in darkness. But the city did not break. The bullet holes in the glass of Le Petit Cambodge were eventually replaced. The blood was washed from the Boulevard Voltaire. And exactly 1 year later, the Bataclan concert hall reopened its newly installed doors, the heavy bass of rock music once again vibrating the floorboards. Because while the intelligence systems failed, and while the architecture of safety proved to be tragically fragile, the resilience of the human spirit, the sheer defiant will to keep living, keep dancing, and keep standing shoulder to shoulder is a force that no bullet and no bomb can ever truly destroy.